Hello and welcome back. This week for episode 10, I'm joined by Kini Roesler, conservation ecologist for Aves Argentinas, who is going to be sharing his remarkable story of how at first he, and then later passionate volunteers, who were a bit mad, saved the grebe from extinction in Patagonia. Starting out as a young birdwatcher, Kini took his passion into his studies, but cut them short as he realized the grebe were vanishing fast due to invasive mink, climate change, and other human causes. He gives us an overview of the grebe, the climate situation in Patagonia, future predictions, and much more. If you like this episode and would like to follow Kini's work, please follow the links in the description. And if you would like to support us, you can make a donation at restoreourplanet.org or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Enjoy the conversation. Good evening. Welcome back to Restore Our Planet podcast with me, your host, Chad Cole. I'm here joined by Kini Roesler from Argentina, who works with Aves Argentinas. And yeah, Kini, welcome.
Hello, how are you, Shaq? Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a privilege to have you. So just to start, Kini, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into the work that you're doing today with, your passions for conservation in Patagonia?
Well, I'm a kind of conservation biologist. I got my PhD in Buenos Aires University a few years ago. And I'm a bird watcher. I started with the bird watching activity when I was living in the middle of the Pampas. Nobody was a bird watcher at that time there in the Pampas. Actually, I thought that I was the only bird watcher in the world because I didn't knew anybody that was in that activity. Afterwards, I realized that there were a lot of people around the world doing that. And that was a kind of a good discovery because I kind of joined at the very early stage to a lot of people that were really passionate about birds, about conservation. So I become member of Aves Argentinas, the BirdLife partner in Argentinas, when I was, 13 years old. And soon after, I already started to work in conservation projects, like a volunteer, of course. So when I went to university, I was already involved in this conservation world, and that was kind of I was a privileged guy who have the chance to join very early on or find very early his passion. So I was I'm very happy about that.
Good, fantastic. And so give us a bit of an overview of sort of nature and wildlife in Patagonia, because obviously it's a place that captures a lot of people's imaginations.
Well, I want to start to saying that actually I wasn't very fan of Patagonia when I was a young biologist. Yeah.
All right.
I was really passionate about the tropical Andes. I was a fan of tropical Andes. Actually, I was a fan of this ornithologist called John Fielso from Denmark. He did really fantastic studies about phylogeography and conservation and ecology of birds in the Andes. And he was kind of a terrific ornithologist. And he actually is a really good artist. He has this Bird of the High Andes book. And I was really into what he had done in the past. And suddenly, when I applied to a grant in the US, I was trying to go there to a PhD in the Andes. I kind of have the opportunity to go to help on the first season in the Hoodie Grebe project, also as a technician, very simple. And turned out that Patagonia was much nicer than I was expecting. Actually, I was in Patagonia before, but by the first time I kind of went connected with this huge landscape, this kind of fabulous landscape, these sceneries like the glaciers and I don't know if you heard about the Fitzroy Mountain, which is an awesome spot in southern Patagonia, and especially the habitat of the Hoodie Grebe, which is these highland plateaus where there is not a single human soul around, just except some kind of puesteros, what we call the gauchos in the plateaus.
Cowboys.
So these guys they are only with their sheep in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of, you feel like in the real wildlife. That was the first time I really feel I was in wildlife. Nobody had been in those places. No, there's nobody around. That's kind of impressive of Patagonia.
Awesome. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what's happened with the grebe, the journey that's been on then. that you have?
Well, the grebe, as you may know, is a species that you know the grebes. You have this fabulous crested grebe in the UK, and they are very popular birds. Actually, Julian Huxley, one this famous ornithologist, the grandson of the famous Huxley, the friend of Darwin. Actually, he studied the crested grebe because it's this kind of charismatic species. But the hooded grebe was discovered just in 1974. Which is kind of really recent for science, no? It's such a nice bird and was discovered in 74. And so it called the attention to a lot of people that started studying it, and they thought it was really in danger. But then they realized that they live in such a kind of, wild habitat that actually John Fields, this ornithologist I mentioned, said that probably there was no chance for the human to mess with its habitat. So it was secure because it was so remote, but that's not true. And the humans are much more capable of making mess in this remote landscape. And now the grebe population is only 700 individuals, a little bit over 700 individuals, with a lot of threats like global climate change, invasive species such as American mink, the Cape gull, which is a native species but is spreading following human settlements, or the rainbow trout. So there are many things that are happening in Patagonia that, even though there is a remote place far away from civilization, the threats are kind of increasing and making more and more problem for the grebe and for the whole habitat, of course.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of challenges there. Would you mind going into detail a little bit more about the mink and why it is such a problem?
Well, as we mentioned before the podcast, that basically mink is an invasive species that have been released in many places in the world, including the UK. Like you mentioned the water bowl problem.
Right.
Well, actually, it's exactly the same situation. The grebe is suffering from many other threats, like changing in its habitat because of the rainbow trout or the global climate change. And what the mink does is to basically impact on these last colonies or these last individuals, having a very kind of dramatic impact, because the mink predates over the reproductive adults, which are really important when you have a critical species with very few individuals, long-lived animals. Grebes can live over 20 years or more. We don't know exactly how long they can live, but they are kind of birds that can last for many years. So when you have these invasive species that it's killing a big number of reproductive adults, is creating like a very big disbalance on the population. And the problem with the mink is that one individual we found that killed over 33 adults in one night. So the impact of each individual mink over the grebe population is dramatic, as I said before.
Yeah, no, completely. Okay, so where did you come in, and tell us a little bit about your journey of rescuing the grebe from extinction?
Well, when I joined this first crew of the Hooded Grebe project, before the Hooded Grebe project start, we thought that the grebe was doing bad, but we not even dreamed that it was doing that bad. We didn't know that the mink was one of the problems. We kind of had the idea that the trout was the biggest problem. We were not sure. So my role in all this kind of movie, for saying in one way, is I was just a biologist that was in the right place in the right moment, because I was aiming to go for a PhD. And suddenly we have this big question: what was going on with the hooded grebe? So basically my role was to start to research and try to figure out what was going on. And what we found in the very early years of the Hooded Grebe project was that there were these kind of threats, like the mink especially. So basically my research had to focus more in solving the problems than understanding the problems, because we understand really quick which were the problems that they were affecting. So basically I had to gather a crew of practitioners and try to solve these problems. So it was at the beginning was really challenging years because we have to convince the conservation community that the grebe was critically facing extinction in a like very close. It was like if we didn't do anything, that the extinction probably was already happened. We don't know that well,
Right.
but was a dramatic situation. So these first years were really challenging because we didn't have the funding, but we knew that was going on. So I think that my most important role was to convince people to join us in this kind of journey. And now we are a team of 24 people working full time on the project, and I think that's kind of our biggest success, because now the grebe population is having stabilized, and now the project is growing and protecting not only the hooded grebe but the whole ecosystem where the hooded grebe lives. So it's kind of so far it's a successful history.
Absolutely. So give us a few more details of. I think I'm right in saying that you introduced some artificial nests, and then you had the guardians, people that would essentially guard the nests 24 hours a day, pretty much, something like that. Is that more or less what happens?
Yeah. Well, yeah, one of the most successful conservation strategies was we realized that we need as many chicks as we can. For every single egg of the hooded grebe was important, because we knew that the problem was reproductions, like the breeding success. So what we created was this colony guardian program, which was kind of a little bit of a crazy idea at the time, but basically was to get even more crazy people to travel and to camp for 3-4 months on the colonies of grebes and live and protect the grebe 24/7 for the whole breeding season. And basically what we accomplished with these crazy people, that actually I was part of the crew of crazy people at that time. Was to basically we duplicate the success of the grebe comparing with the natural unprotected colonies. So that was really awesome. And basically what we did with that is that people that went there as a colony guardian become so passionate as the hooded grebe that they keep coming and keep protecting the grebe, and we increase the number of colony guardians. And we basically nowadays we have a crew of colony guardians that we are certain that if we have a colony, we have the chances to protect it. So that was pretty cool.
And so how does that work? I mean, is it literally the case of chasing a mink with a big stick if one comes near the nest, or?
Actually, it's a pretty boring show, because 99% of the time nothing happens. You are just there sitting, looking at the colony, engaging with the birds, like creating like a special connection with the birds, something like that. But basically, it's just they do censuses, they collect data, like scientific data, but they basically don't do anything special. But the problem is that they have to be extremely prepared. This 1% of the time something happened. They have to be prepared. And basically what can happen to a colony is that a gull arrive and you have to be there to chase the gull away, because one gull, we have records that one gull can destroy a colony of 40 nests in less than 40 minutes. So takes less than a minute per nest to destroy the whole colony. So basically they cannot be distracted, because if they are distracted for an hour, basically they can lose the whole colony. That's kind of a chance. And with the mink is the same thing. They are all the time patrolling the lakes, trying to be kind of detect the mink as soon as it's arrived to the lake. And then once the mink arrived, they have to catch it, mostly with traps, with these tomahawk live traps. So they have to be really ready to react. And once the mink is around, they cannot sleep. They have to turn and be all the time awake, because the mink mostly attack during the night. So it's kind of it's a very stressful situation for the people.
A lot of sleep deprivation. And you created artificial nests, am I correct in saying, and put them in the middle of the lake? Something like that?
Yeah, Yeah, the problem in the last 3 years was that there was no natural kind of habitat for the mink to reproduce. The mink use the only water plant that grows in those lakes, which is called water milfoil. And because probably of global climate change, the last 3 years that plant did not flower. So basically, the grebe did not have the materials to build their nest. That they are like floating platforms. So what we did was to create these artificial floating platforms. Now we are in these days we are actually setting about I would say like 40 artificial platform in one special lake, which is always a really good lake for grebe reproduction. And with that, we are hoping to kind of at least compensate this lack of material to build a nest, and at least to have some chicks per season.
Fantastic. Okay, so your work got recognized by some quite sort of high status people. Do you want to tell us a little bit about when David Attenborough gave you a shout out, or I'm not actually sure how it worked, but would you mind telling us about that whole story and how that was for you?
Well, yeah, well, actually, it was a bummer because actually usually that's you have to go to London and there's a ceremony and you get to know actually in person to David Attenborough. And this year, because of the pandemic, it was all through Zoom. So it was kind of a disappointment. But actually, I was lucky enough to already meet David Attenborough in one of these Congress for a Student in Cambridge some years ago.
Amazing.
So, well, I have that part already covered. But yeah, now what was superb. Actually, it was a little bit. I was a little bit kind of I don't know how to say it in English, but the prize that they gave me and all this recognition with David Attenborough, etc., was to me. But actually, this is kind of our project. The main kind of force or the main strength of our project is that there is a kind of a group of people really passionate and basically joining forces to make it happen. Actually, so perhaps my only perhaps merit is that I was one of the first one, but all these people that is now around is kind of actually is as important as myself. So but we are all really happy, and we are absolutely kind of I don't know how to say it,
ecstatic.
But we basically, yeah, because of this David Attenborough talking about the hood grebe and talking about our work is going to basically help us to make this to know to everybody, and that's one of the things that really care.
Fantastic. So we've covered the grebe a little bit there. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about sort of the wider scope of what's happening in other parts of Patagonia, maybe some other species, or effects of climate change, or just give us a bit more of a flavor of what else is going on out there?
Well, as I mentioned, one of the good things of the hood grebe was that we managed, actually also thanks to David Attenborough for sure, we managed to create the hood grebe as a symbol for conservation in Patagonia, and that gives us the chance to start to do some research in other species. And what we start to find out is that many other species like the Austral rail, the torrent duck, the Magellanic plover, the Walsum cicacia, the Austral river otter, all these species are suffering more or less the same problems that the hood grebe. Basically, global climate change is changing everything. Patagonia is getting much more dry than it used to be. It's much less snow every year, harder winds. So basically, all the wetlands are getting dry, all the lakes are getting dry. And as you may know, like we talk about the mink, when you have this kind of a population that they are suffering some stress or reducing its habitat, when you have invasive species, the impact of those invasive species is even bigger. So American mink is not just affecting the hood grebe, it's affecting like I said, like the austral rate, probably its population had reduced over 90% that it used to be. The distribution of the austral rate reached to Santiago de Chile, and now we only have the austral rail in the southern tip of Patagonia in Argentina and Chile. So basically, the distribution reduction of the austral rail is dramatic, but well, it's a less charismatic species. So having an umbrella species like the Holden Grebe or like a flagship species is giving us the chance to understand what's going on in the whole environment. And that's kind of, I think, is one of the biggest also accomplishment of the Hood Grebe project, to try to engage more people in conservation of other species.
Brilliant. I was just about to come on to that. So do you feel quite optimistic about the younger generations and where they're taking things?
Yeah, of course. Younger generations are the kind of are bringing us a little bit of hope on this kind of. If you work in conservation, you tend to hear so many bad things all the time that you start to become a little bit depressed. But then you start to realize that the people is at least is slowly changing. I always mention that when I was my early age in university, was really extremely rare to see any news about any animals in the newspaper, or hear any radio show with talking about anything about wildlife. And nowadays is every day you can hear in the radio, or of course in the internet everywhere, or you have the podcast. And I think that's kind of a symbol. It's not just that communication is much more available for everybody, but it's also that people is also more interesting on that. So I think that's because of the new generations, and the new generations are growing with a different perspective on everything. So as we are different from our fathers, probably, yeah, our sons are going to be much more open-minded for trying to help or protect biodiversity. So yeah, most of the people that nowadays is working with us are in the early 20s. So that's kind of makes you feel that we are in the, even though it's a rough path, we are in a good path.
Absolutely. Good. Okay, so what would you like to see change over the next 10 years in Patagonia in terms of conservation or policy, or maybe government intervention?
Well, Patagonia, as many other kind of desert-like habitats, had been really left apart and considered like low importance for biodiversity, because the biodiversity kind of is low. But nowadays you can find like oil companies, mining companies, big hydroelectric dams. So basically what I'm hoping in the next 10 years is that the perception of the people about this kind of not as impressive habitat like the rainforest, they are going to be taken into account and realize that they have, even though they are deserts, they are kind of, they hold kind of this kind of species. They are very important and very special for everybody, because they are there and they don't live anywhere else in the world.
Brilliant. Okay, so would you say you're optimistic about the future? Or
yeah, humans are a special, is a special animal, but very weird to understand. I think nobody have we have a much deeper understanding on many other species rather than the humans. So I don't know what to predict with us, but I think we are in a better path than we were 10, 15 years ago, for sure.
Absolutely. And Kini, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Oh, I'm really glad that you are working doing this podcast, because, as I mentioned, I think we need to spread the voice as much as we can. There's still a lot of people to get involved with conservation, with Patagonia, with the Hood Grebe. So I'm really happy to join and try to convince people. Even though I'm just a biologist, I have no training on share my experience, but I'm glad you are people like you that are doing this stuff.
Well, thank you. And where can people find you and your work if they want to look you up?
Well, we have a lot of social network like Instagram, Facebook, and basically they can look for us in Aves Argentinas, which is the partner of BirdLife, or go through BirdLife to all the partners and look for Aves Argentinas. And we have our own networks called Programa Patagonia, which is the Patagonian program, which kind of is focused only in the Grebe and in Patagonian species. So it's really nice. And then, or join me on my own social network, like in Twitter. I'm very active in Twitter because it's much more fun to share news and to discuss stuff with people.
Yeah, it's quite chaotic. Okay, Kini, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.